local drug task force projects. Blanchardstown Early School Leavers is a local response to significant numbers of young people aged between 12 and 16 in the area who are not in education. And Family Base in Ballyfermot primarily provides an early intervention and prevention service, working with children and young people and families affected by parental substance misuse or mental health issues. In addition, the department provides funding to the Talbot Centre for an education worker. The centre is a free support service for children, young people and families affected by the misuse of drugs and alcohol, based in Dublin's North Inner City. The Delivering Equality of Opportunity in Schools DESH programme is the key policy initiative of government to address concentrated disadvantage. As the committee members are aware, it's the goal of the government to reduce educational disadvantage. DESH provides additional supports to schools with the highest levels of education disadvantage. It seeks to improve educational outcomes, tackles intergenerational disadvantage, and empowers children and young people to achieve their full potential. The DESH programme supports almost 1,200 schools and 260,000 children and young people, with an annual investment of over 180 million. Additional funding secured in Budget 26 for the implementation of a new DESH strategy, and particularly the new DESH Plus scheme, is a further positive step in the government's commitment to lift more children and young people out of poverty and give them the futures they deserve.
Ms Egan, if it's okay, we're a minute over, and we'll come back to you at the end to finish, because I said the section on homeschool and community liaison will be really important, but I might come back to you for that, if that's okay.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. I now invite Ms O'Brien to give your opening statement on behalf of the Department of Further and Higher Education, the Research, Innovation and Science.
Thank you, Ciara. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to your important work under the second module on education, youth and prevention, and to speak to the theme of education awareness and addiction prevention in schools. The Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science has a central role in ensuring that our further and higher education institutions foster safe, inclusive and healthy learning environments for all students. Within the higher education sector, the Higher Education Authority's Healthy Campus Charter and Framework provide the foundation for a whole campus approach to wellbeing. This approach encourages institutions to address locally identified student needs in alignment with national health priorities, including alcohol, drug and tobacco use, as well as mental health. The Healthy Campus Safe Evaluation tool enables each institution to assess its progress in areas such as governance, campus culture, communication and health focus areas. Through this structured process, colleges can identify and strengthen their responses to substance use, addiction prevention and related risk behaviours. The Department and the HEA also work closely with colleagues in the Department of Health, the HSC and the Health Research Board to promote data-driven, evidence-based interventions. A recent example is the eShield project led by University College Cork, which builds on the national framework for response to the use of illicit substances in higher education. This initiative empowers students and institutions alike to take a leadership role in prevention, education and early intervention. Across the system, institutions are embedding health and wellbeing supports, from addiction recovery and counselling services to peer-led awareness campaigns and digital wellbeing tools. These efforts complement the National Student Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Framework, which has currently been updated to reflect the latest evidence and best practice. Within further education and training, or FET, a wide range of programmes aim to raise awareness and reduce harms for individuals, families and communities, including young people. Across all FET provision, policies and procedures on drug use are in place. Each Education and Training Board, or ETB, has an overarching drug use policy which individual FET centres then adapt to meet their specific needs, supported by detailed procedures. While large-scale impactful preventative education is challenging in many parts of FET, where there are short-term and part-time courses, targeted initiatives are making an impact. The Youth Reach programme is important in this effort. Serving 7,000 early school leavers annually, Youth Reach provides 2 years of education and training in a safe, supportive environment. Social, personal and health education in Youth Reach covers drug awareness alongside mental health, wellbeing and decision making. Many centres partner with local drug task force and other specialist agencies to deliver workshops and counselling. For example, Blanchardstown Community Training Centre is grant funded by its ETB to deliver the Youth Reach programme. It works with the local drugs and alcohol task force, the D15 community addiction team, to provide programmes such as Know Before You Buy, which raises awareness about the dangers of drug debt and criminal networks. Preventive education also extends to justice workshops for individuals engaged with the criminal justice system. Funded by the Probation Service and supported by ETBs through Choose Your Cooperation Hours and other supports, these workshops often include drug education for both preventive and recovery. Dublin and Dún Laoghaire ETB, for instance, support such workshops in Clondalkin, Dún Laoghaire and Tala. Community education plays a vital role in reaching those who face barriers to traditional learning. SOLA's funding for community education has grown significantly in recent years, from 11 million in 2018 to 17 million in 2025. In addition, a wide range of community education projects are supported through SOLA's Reach Fund and All in Collaboration Fund, with allocations of 4.5 million and 1 million respectively in 2025. A significant share of funded projects focus on drug education, including preventive education. The Matt Talbot Community Trust in Ballyfermot is a strong example. It is supported by City of Dublin ETB with Choose Your Cooperation Hours and a Reach Fund grant, and offers person-centred supports, workshops and peer-led discussions to support people in recovery. Finally, addiction study courses are available across FET, from Level 5 modules in community development to programmes delivered in prison education units. Such programmes not only raise awareness but also provide pathways for individuals in recovery to progress in education and contribute to prevention efforts within communities and amongst young people. While challenges remain, ETBs and their partners play an important role in delivering preventive education across youth reach, justice workshops, community education, in prison settings and in other parts of FET. The Department reckons that prevention and education are most effective when delivered collaboratively, linking policy research and lived experience. We are committed to continue this partnership approach so that every learner across every part of our education system can achieve their full potential in a safe and supportive environment. I would like to thank the committee for their invitation today and for considering this submission from the Department of Further Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science.
Thank you so much for your contribution. I'd now like to invite Ms O'Connor to give your opening statement on behalf of the National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals.
Thank you. Chairperson and members of the committee, on behalf of the National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals, NAPD, I wish to thank you for the opportunity to represent the voice of post-primary school leaders. We welcome the opportunity to contribute to this important national conversation on education, awareness and addiction prevention in our schools. NAPD represents the leaders of second-level schools across all sectors. As school principals and deputy principals, we are not only tasked under the Education Act of 1998 with managing schools, but we also endeavour to lead learning, foster equity and provide opportunities for growth and development for every student. Schools acknowledge that their role is to meet the needs of their students academically, socially, holistically and pastorally. Every day in our schools, we see at first hand the challenges and opportunities facing young people as they navigate adolescence. They are growing up in a complex and often pressurised environment, one that demands not only academic achievement but also resilience, emotional awareness and responsible decision making. Schools therefore play a central role in supporting the well-being and personal development of all students. We believe education plays an important role in addiction prevention. Schools are trusted spaces where young people can explore issues openly, build critical thinking skills and learn to make informed choices. In addressing substance use and addiction prevention, our approach must be grounded in education that enables rather than simply instructs. Education is the key that develops understanding, confidence and fosters agency. In addition, it also must be recognised that schools are not medical establishments, they are not treatment centres, they are not counselling clinics. They are in fact schools whose primary responsibility is the delivery and support of learning. The recently redeveloped Senior Cycle SPHE curriculum provides an essential framework for this work. It adopts a holistic and evidence-based approach to well-being, relationships and responsible decision-making. The curriculum enables students to examine topics such as mental health, risk behaviour and substance use through dialogue, reflection and critical analysis. Importantly, it moves beyond the delivery of information towards the development of life skills, self-awareness, empathy and the ability to seek help. In doing so, it equips our young people with the personal and social competencies that act as protective factors against addiction and substance misuse. The work of schools in this area aligns closely with the Department of Education and Youth's Wellbeing Policy and Framework for Practice and with the wider Youth Strategy for Education, both of which place the wellbeing of young people at the heart of the educational experience. These policies recognise that wellbeing is not a standalone subject but is the responsibility of the whole school community. They also highlight the importance of collaboration between schools, parents, youth services and community and health agencies in promoting addiction prevention and early intervention. As school leaders, we fully support this joined-up approach. The challenges associated with addiction cannot be addressed by schools in isolation. They require sustained partnership across sectors. Most schools have an operational student support team. This team involves all of the significant school personnel to support the student. For example, you'll have the principal and/or the deputy, the career guidance counsellor, the year head, the special needs coordinator and other qualified or interested teachers. The student support team meets regularly and implements school-based interventions to support the engagement of the student with their learning in school. There are, however, limits to what the student support team can do to support students. Schools are only available to students during their opening hours from Monday to Friday and for 166 school days in the year. In addition, it is particularly concerning if a student is not attending school, which is a common consequence for students experiencing trauma or having significant personal issues. Additionally, it is fair to say that the majority of schools do not have access to a homeschool community liaison teacher, and this represents or presents particular difficulties for schools connecting with the home to positively collaborate in the best interest of the student. Across the post-primary sector, significant and commendable work is already underway. Teachers deliver SPHE and wellbeing programmes with professionalism and commitment. Many schools engage external agencies and guest speakers to complement classroom learning with lived experience and specialist knowledge. However, we must acknowledge the ongoing challenges that impact the consistency and depth of this work. Timetabling pressures with an already demanding curriculum, variations in provision and access to specialist supports across schools, and the need for sustained professional development so that teachers feel confident in facilitating sensitive and complex discussions around addiction, mental health and personal responsibility. Addiction prevention is most effective when embedded within a whole school culture that promotes inclusion, belonging and respect. School policies on wellbeing, relationships and behaviour must be coherent, consistent and rooted in care. Equally, the broader senior cycle framework provides a timely opportunity to strengthen the role of wellbeing within the curriculum. Embedding prevention and resilience as part of our educational vision rather than as a single programme or initiative is key to long-term impact. In conclusion, Chair and members, we respectfully propose that the committee, number one, support continued investment in SPHE, wellbeing and teacher professional development. Two, facilitate stronger interagency collaboration between education, youth and health sectors. Three, recognise schools as key partners in national addiction prevention efforts. And four, ensure that the voices of young people continue to inform policy and practice in this area. Education remains our most powerful tool for addiction prevention. By equipping young people with the knowledge, skills and confidence to make positive choices, we help them to build not only healthier lives but stronger communities and a safer future for all.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. Our next contributor is Dr. Craig to give your opening statement on behalf of the Health Research Board.
Members of the committee, the HRB, the Health Research Board, welcomes the invitation to attend this joint committee on drugs use and to present some of its work in relation to drugs, drug use and intervention and prevention strategies. The HRB is an established statutory agency with a history of involvement in drug and alcohol research and in providing expertise and evidence for policy in this area. The organisation's expertise and capacity to provide evidence is recognised by policymakers as an essential asset in policy formation in the drugs area. HRB staff have worked very closely with policymakers on successive drug strategies, and we have participated in important policy implementation committees, such as the steering group working on the new National Drug Strategy and the Citizens' Assembly on drugs use in 2023. The HRB manages 2 national health surveillance systems that collect, analyse and report data on entries to alcohol and drug treatment and deaths in which drugs, including alcohol, are a contributing factor. Data from these systems form an important evidence base for policy and practice in relation to drugs and alcohol. The HRB is Ireland's national focal point to the European Union Drugs Agency, and as part of its European reporting requirements, epidemiologists and social researchers based in the HRB provide information on key health indicators related to drug use and its consequences. We also report on drug markets, drug-related crime and responses to the drug situation, including treatment, harm reduction services and prevention. Our relevance to the work of the Joint Committee lies in our recognition as a trusted voice for high-quality data and evidence that is used to inform policy, practice and ultimately to positively impact on the health and well-being of society. Thank you, Ciara.
Thank you, Ms. Craig, and thank you for sticking to the time. Our next contributor is Dr. Sheehan to give your opening statement on behalf of the Health Service Executive HSE. You're very welcome.
Good afternoon. Here, members of the committee and colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. We will outline the challenges of substance use amongst young people in Ireland, the importance of education and awareness within our wider prevention approach, and how we can further strengthen our collective response. In Ireland, around 2/3 of young people engage in hazardous or binge drinking. Irish research shows that early initiation of alcohol increases the risk of other substance use, with high-risk alcohol use doubling the odds of other drug use. Cannabis is the most commonly used illicit drug amongst young people. 12% of 16-year-olds and 59% of 20-year-olds have ever used it, while 28% have tried other drugs. We also see rapid growth in vaping and concerns about gambling addiction. Cannabis is the most common substance used among 17 to 20-year-olds treated for problematic drug use. A recent study found cannabis use was associated with early use of alcohol, smoking and e-cigarettes. Peer use and peer pressure were strong predictors of use. These patterns highlight the importance of early, sustained prevention in all settings, especially schools, colleges, communities and homes, where we can equip parents and build resilient skills and confidence before risky behaviours form. Prevention efforts must also consider the wider building blocks needed for good health and well-being, including fair pay, good working conditions, good housing and access to quality education. In public health, we describe prevention across 3 levels. Primary prevention focuses on stopping problems before they start. Secondary prevention involves early detection and providing support to prevent escalation. Tertiary prevention addresses existing problems through treatment and recovery supports, aiming to reduce harm and minimise long-term impact. Prevention of substance use operates through environmental measures, such as the enforcement of laws and regulations governing the availability of drugs and alcohol, and creating youth spaces that make healthy behaviours easier. Universal interventions, including national information resources like the HSE's website and the Department of Education's actions in schools. And then targeted and indicated interventions for young people in communities at higher risk, such as early school leavers and children of substance users. The HSE delivers drug and alcohol information through drugs.ie, askaboutalcohol.ie and the HSE Drug and Alcohol Helpline. In 2024, there were 6,488 contacts to the helpline, and the web content on alcohol and drugs attracted over 700,000 site visits. Online resources include guides for parents, public webinars, including a recent webinar for parents on vaping and cannabinoids. In schools, HSE Health and Wellbeing support the Department of Education and Youth in the implementation of the Wellbeing Policy and Framework for Practice. The HSE has co-developed resources for junior cycle and senior cycle SPHE in partnership with the Department of Education, the National Educational Psychological Service, NEPS, and the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, NCCA. Work is in progress to further develop resources for the senior cycle SPHE, providing 60 learning hours over 2 years that will be mandatory for all schools from 2027. These support young people to develop resilience, critical thinking and confidence to make informed decisions. For senior cycle, the HSE, the Department of Education and the Drug and Alcohol Task Forces jointly developed Know the Score, the evidence-based substance use prevention education programme. This provides 14 interactive lesson plans designed to help young people make conscious, informed decisions about alcohol and drugs. An independent evaluation funded by the Department of Health is underway and will inform future content. The HSE and the Department of Education and Youth provide teacher professional training, learning reaching approximately 1,000 teachers each year, including training on Know the Score, skills for facilitating SPHE, and new training in mental health and emotional wellbeing education developed with NEPS and NCCA. In higher education settings, the HSE supported the creation and now implementation of the Higher Education Authority's Healthy Campus Charter and Framework. Another initiative funded by the Department of Health's Drug Prevention and Education Funding Programme is the eShield programme, which supports students and higher education institutions to reduce harms experienced through drug use and reduce the number of students choosing to take drugs. A national implementation of the framework for addressing the use of illicit substances within higher education colleges will commence in 2026. These are important, given the majority of people who use substances like ketamine and cocaine commence use aged 18 to 20. Whilst education is a key setting for prevention, actions are also required in family, social, community, online and policy settings. Those who enter the workforce straight from school or early school leavers also require preventative interventions. Given the association between mental health difficulties and substance use, we also support the implementation of our National Mental Health Policy Sharing the Vision and the HSE's Child and Youth Mental Health Action Plan. A strong prevention system relies on coordinated interagency work across education, health, child and family, youth and community sectors. Structures that support this include drug and alcohol task forces and children and young people services committees, who lead a range of interagency prevention initiatives such as Planet Youth and Communities That Care. However, Ireland's current prevention efforts vary geographically and may not fully reflect best practice or population needs. To design an effective and equitable national approach to prevention, we must understand both the underlying causes of drugs and alcohol use in Ireland and the strengths and limitations of current responses. Public Health and the HSE is currently leading a national needs assessment for drugs and alcohol prevention to help answer these questions. It will conclude in 2026 and will inform HSE prevention efforts and support implementation of the forthcoming National Drug Strategy and Healthy Ireland Strategy. Early findings indicate that there's a lack of comprehensive national infrastructure for drug prevention, with gaps in resourcing, training, staff support and research and evaluation. To strengthen our collective response to prevention, we need to apply a health in all policies approach across sectors to create a coherent prevention environment and address the broader determinants of substance use. Build a prevention system and workforce and invest in environmental, universal and targeted prevention initiatives. Complete the HSE's National Needs Assessment for Drugs and Alcohol Prevention and develop an implementation plan to act upon its findings. Continue to support the Department of Education and Youth and Higher Education Authorities frameworks and ensure programmes are evidence-informed, consistently implemented with quality and adequately resourced to deliver at scale nationally, whilst allowing for flexibility to meet the needs and contexts of local communities. Prevention works best when it begins early, is sustained and is supported by the whole community, with schools, families, services and policy systems working together. The HSE is committed to collaborating with partners to achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shin. I will now open it up to members. The rota has been submitted in advance and the first person on the rota is Deputy Anne Graves.
Listen, I want to thank you all for coming here today, and just to let you know, before I went into politics, my career for 30 plus years was in the area of education. I worked in QQI, HETAC, VTAC before that, so I recognise the value of the work that you all do, and the importance for our young people to have a decent education system, and also recognition that, you know, addiction isn't caused in a vacuum, and we need to make sure that we have measures in place that gives them the tools to deal with those. As usual, we kind of run out of time on this, so we don't get around to all of the questions. So I'm glad all of your presentations were so full, but I have a few questions I'd just like to throw and see how we get through them. So, Department of Education and Youth, first of all, you know, I recognise your role and how central it is in developing policy and delivering programmes. So I'd really like to know what your engagement was with the department in drafting the forthcoming strategy, and if you had any input and how in-depth that was. And probably second there is I'm concerned to kind of hear that the DESH schools have been closed off to new applicants, and that only the DESH plus applicants that already have DESH status are up and running. I think that's a very aggressive step if that is the case, but I'd like to know if that's the case. Secondly, then the Department of Further and Higher Education, just to ask you if there's scope for, or is there an agreed process to ensure that students in third level who come forward and looking for help, that there's no penalisation of them, or there's no kind of flag because they've done so. And then what the in-reach education programmes that are available within prisons and how successful they have been. I'm just going to fly through these questions, throw them out, and then we'll see. So the HRB then, the original Rabbit report put heroin in the context of marginalised communities. It was the first time that it was kind of recognised that poverty and social economic marginalisation contributed to addiction. Is that still the considered opinion, or has that changed, and does the drug crisis remain primarily in marginalised communities? The NAPD, then just I note your list here, and how do you see that that we can help with facilitating stronger interagency collaboration between education, youth and health services? How would you see that work? I'm sorry, I've little notes written to myself all over the place. I think that's everyone. Yeah, thanks.
All guys there. Who wants to go first? Yeah, yourself, Celeste.
So I'll just take the question first
Yeah.
about the drug strategy, and I think you were asking what was our engagement with the Department of Health on the drug strategy. So, so our department was a member of the steering group of the previous strategy, 2017 to 2025. So we worked quite closely, and we had a number of actions in that which are similar to what has been outlined in the opening statement there. But I think we're awaiting the next stage of engagement on the new national drug strategy. So we're kind of ready and willing to engage with the Department of Health in relation to that. But I think that hasn't happened as yet. We haven't had engagement on the new strategy at this stage. But we are, as has been said, we do have a lot of engagement with the HSE around supporting the work that we're doing. So we'd see our role in the next strategy as being kind of building on the work that we're doing in relation to both the curriculum piece and then also all of the inclusion areas. So it's in that space that we will see our engagement. I think on the DESH side, Ronja, I might hand over to my colleague.
Yeah, on the DESH side, Deputy, the Minister committed to publishing a new DESH strategy and details of a DESH Plus scheme before the end of this year. And the DESH strategy will set out the Department's strategic direction for improving opportunities and achievement levels for children at risk of educational disadvantage. And it will develop more innovative approaches as well to tackling educational disadvantage. So that DESH strategy will be published in the coming weeks before the end of this year.
Okay, and in the meantime, is it closed off to new applicants?
Yeah, I suppose it was never open to applicants because there was the DESH identification model that was applied kind of consistently across the board to all schools. So schools were selected then for inclusion in DESH based on their concentrated level of disadvantage. So, and it will apply to for the DESH Plus scheme. There won't be an application process for schools.
Anyone else want to come in? There was a whole range of questions there. Yes, please.
Just in relation to your comment about heroin use and poverty and the study previously, just to say the HRB has done some work with PUBL looking at their deprivation index and linking it with our drug treatment data. We're actually updating that, so there will be more information available next year, early next year hopefully. But certainly the previous study had high correlation between areas of high deprivation and presentation for treatment. So that's
my question was really about because there were certain areas that were always identified as being high kind of areas for drug use and addiction. But now we know every village and town right across the country is affected in some way, and there are no services. So just wondering whether that's whether the consideration is still, well, look, it's marginalised area. I think a lot of us would know that it's not necessarily. It's worse maybe in marginalised area, but it is affecting everybody. Okay. Be interesting to see the research now as well.
Coming on that, I guess for young people for whom prevention has failed and end up needing addiction treatment services, so that's what we deal with in our service, that cohort of young people, and we see young people from every sector of society. And if you sort of go back a couple of steps towards some of the survey data, like Margaret Brennan's recent research looking at the Growing Up in Ireland data about people's sort of initial steps into drug use, you see certainly at the age of 20, there's no socioeconomic gradient. And if there's any slight gradient, it's that young people from slightly wealthier backgrounds are potentially more likely to step into cocaine use. So that relationship between drug use and deprivation was genuinely extremely strong for drugs like heroin in the past, remains strong for drugs like crack cocaine now, but for all other drugs, they're pretty much universal across the board.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deputy Graves. We can come back in a second round. Deputy Marie Sherlock, you're next on the list.
And thank you very much to all the witnesses here today. And I just want to say a particular note to the Health Research Board, just in terms of thank you for all your work, because I think that data is vital in terms of us understanding what the picture is. But to all witnesses here today, thank you. I suppose my first set of questions are to the Department of Education and to the NAPD. So I suppose the point is made that obviously not every school has a home HSCL, exactly, and obviously we very much welcome the DESH Plus when we're going to see it announced over the coming weeks, and we look forward to seeing the list of what schools are going to be included and all of that. But I want to ask about the non-DESH schools, right? So I'm thinking particularly of those schools that, for instance, schools that deal with special schools. And special schools in particular that deal with emotional behavioural difficulties, and particularly those special schools dealing with severe emotional behavioural difficulties, because most, if not all, of the children in those schools are presenting with, I suppose, behaviours arising from trauma or other issues, in their home or in their community environment. And so there isn't any of the facilities or the provisions that are made for DESH schools available to special schools working with those children who are there because of the trauma that they have experienced. And I suppose I'd like to hear both from yourself and the NAPD, but particularly from the department, do you see that there is a gap or a lacuna here from the department's perspective as to the supports that can be put in place? Because I'm conscious our conversation today is about awareness and addiction prevention, but also it is about I would like to think that we're talking about the children who are living in a household with addiction and how they are supported as well. And I suppose the role of the Department of Education. But to yourself first in the NPD, thank you.
Yes, no, and thank you for that. And I suppose in addition to that, not only special schools that are perhaps not in the DESH programme, but we would see it could be commonplace in a town, for example, that you have a post-primary school that's not designated DESH but has 4 feeder DESH primary schools. Yes. And the post-primary school, for whatever reason, then isn't designated DESH. And then that leads to, again, lack of key personnel. So schools are doing their very, very best in terms of the early interventions piece. Engaging with HSE, know the score and SPHE and so on. But if you don't have personnel and people on the ground to implement and roll out these programmes, so for example, we still haven't gone to full restoration of guidance counselling in our school. Okay. We don't have homeschool community liaison people in our schools. The school completion programme. I was principal for 10 years of a post-primary DESH school, and I had the wealth of all of these supports, given where I was, and it was a rural DESH 1 band school. So it had a full myriad of complications, and exactly as you described. But unless, number one, to go back to what the other deputy asked in terms of that interagency support, that's an addition to what we do in schools. Unless the other agencies themselves can have the capacity to deal with what we refer on. But in the first instance, if we can't deal with it at school because we're lacking this key personnel, we're up to nothing. We can only, work with the hand that we're dealt. And I know that, in terms of the department, we don't choose to be in DESH, we don't choose to be out of DESH. Every school would love to have DESH status. Of course. Gives a lower pupil-teacher ratio, it gives you access to resources, greater funding and so on. But unfortunately, we don't all have access to it.
And I suppose just to be clear, I think we accept that not every school can be DESH, right? Even though we might want those supports. But I suppose in particular, maybe to Ms. O'Callaghan and Ms. Egan, that with regards to special schools that are specifically dealing with children who have an additional need because of the severe emotional behavioural difficulties, who can't access those services. Do you believe that there's a gap there?
Well, I suppose I want to just come in briefly and say, I suppose it's a little bit difficult to say without maybe having an awareness of specific example, specific schools, but I suppose some of the things that are in place that would support those schools would be there is a strong focus on wellbeing overall, so the wellbeing policy and framework for practice would apply to all schools. And the kinds of supports that come through that and the NEP service would be available, but I suppose it can depend on maybe the specific gaps you're thinking of, I suppose, are we thinking of things like ensuring that people have trauma-informed training and so on? So there is trauma-informed training across a whole range of different areas, both within wellbeing and also the youth side. So there are those kinds of supports, but obviously if there are kind of specific, maybe schools with specific challenges, you know, we could answer a bit more specifically on that. Gráinne, do you want to mention the homeschool community liaison?
Yeah, and I just add for the special schools as well, they've got support as well, and resources and supports from the NCSE as well for those schools. Just in relation, I suppose, specifically to the homeschool community liaison coordinators, I suppose DESH is built on the basis that it's supporting the schools that are serving the highest concentrations of students that are experiencing an educational disadvantage. And the HSCL then is a key support under the DESH programme. So the HSCL is allocated to DESH schools. So currently we have 528 HSCLs in the system supporting 682 DESH primary and post-primary schools.
Yeah, no, and thank you. And I do have other questions that I'll ask in the second round, but I suppose just to say, like, so for, I'll give you an example, and I apologise because obviously you didn't come today to kind of, you didn't believe, well, I suppose I'm bringing a different angle, I suppose, to the conversation today, but I do believe it's important. So there's a school in the constituency that Deputy Gannon and myself are in called Casa Katrina. It's a, you know, it's an SABD special school. All the children there are attending because of, I suppose, you know, because of the challenging behaviours that they present arising from trauma that almost all of them have experienced. They have no access to school completion. They have no access to homeschool liaison. They have no access to all the other provisions that we put in place for a DESH school. And I would see that as a gap, because notwithstanding that they have lower class teacher to pupil ratios, notwithstanding that they have SNAs in the classroom, there are also a glaring need and indeed an absence of, I suppose, those specific provisions that are in place for every other DESH school across the country, but because they're not a DESH school, they can't gain access. So I suppose maybe it's something that, you know, obviously I know the department, other officials are aware of it in the department, and I'd love to continue that conversation with yourselves another time. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Sherlock. Next contributor is Senator Nicole Ryan.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you here. My question kind of, I suppose, is around external providers and facilitators. So I had worked in schools for almost 10 years, primarily with secondary schools, working with principals, second level TY coordinators and SPHE teachers, providing services in the drug space around being as an external facilitator for that. And this question is primarily for kind of Ms O'Connor, but it's open to everybody as well to see what your feelings are. Like, do you believe that there should be an external, I suppose, database of external providers that are evidence-based and, I suppose, quality assured? Because from working in it, one of the huge things that the teachers would always say was the fear and the confidence around teaching substance misuse. If a student was to ask me a question, I didn't know the answer, it's like the world would end, you know. And it was a confidence issue, but equally timing, you know, as an SPHE teacher or a teacher, you might be teaching business in English and Irish, and then you're going into your pupils and you're talking about sex and drugs and they're just horrified. Do you think that there should be a database, and is maybe the department looking at a database of external providers? Because regardless if the system is going to be, you know, creating, you know the score, all these programs, schools are still going to rely on external facilitators because they bring something a little bit different than the, I suppose, curriculum does. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, I suppose, also to bear in mind that it's only very recently that DCU, for example, introduced SPHE as a core subject that you actually become qualified in, you know, as a teacher. And then, as with any teacher, I was Gaeilge in geography many, many moons ago, but there was always, you always seek the expert external to your subject. I think it would be absolutely very worthwhile, particularly in the SPHE space. There's a huge legacy of teachers in our system that aren't technically qualified SPHE teachers that may have upskilled through the programmes that IJA and other providers provide. However, you will so there's a legacy in the system of teachers that are not confident. You're almost like timetable fillers at the end of the year, right? Who's left over and who will I get to teach these core subjects? It has changed dramatically over the last couple of years, but absolutely to be able to lean into a database where I can say, right, well, there's the drugs prevention, there's the relationships and sexuality piece, there's the whatever, it would be very worthwhile for school and very helpful to schools.
Great. And potentially, just as an add-on question to that when you're answering, why has that not been established so far?
So just from the department's perspective, I suppose, to come back on a couple of things that connect into that. So with the revision of the SPHE curriculum, we now have, I suppose, a fairly up-to-date curriculum from primary through to senior cycle, and mandatory for the first time at senior cycle as well, which is a significant step forward. And we've put a real focus on training teachers to support that. So in the 2024 to 2025 school year, 2,400 teachers availed of the training that was provided by IJA in relation to both the junior cycle SPHE specification and the senior cycle specification. So we do think that it's really important that teachers are have the skill and the competence and the confidence, I suppose, to deliver that specification. They know their students. There's a large piece about the professionalism of the teacher in determining what's appropriate for the age and stage and the context of the class in front of them. And because there are many sensitive issues, and there will be different, I suppose, different contexts around some of this teaching in different schools and different areas. So all of that needs to be taken into account. The other piece that we're doing, which is really important, is working with the HSE and the NCCA and also NEPS in relation to resources to support the teaching of SPHE. So there are online toolkits for all of these, and the resources that are there are available for teachers to draw on to support them in delivering the specific learning outcomes.
Okay, I get that, but what I'm talking about is the external facilitators that come in, because the onus is on teachers, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I'm saying I think that's the optimum. Now, obviously, schools will avail of external practitioners. We're aware of that, and we do give them guidance on that. But I suppose the other piece is that external organisations do also, the NCCA would liaise with different organisations in relation to resources as well and make those available. So where there are resources that could be made available for teachers, it could be done through that method as well. We haven't developed a specific database on external providers. I suppose there's a huge range of external providers. So while we give guidance to schools and engaging with those to try and, I suppose, determine which of those would make a list, that there are a lot of different aspects here, so it's not something that we have attempted. I think we have put our focus on trying to upskill the teachers.
But when you're talking about the drug space, there isn't a whole pile of external providers that come into the drug. There's a lot in mental health maybe and sexual health consent and stuff, but when you're talking about substance misuse in the secondary school space, there isn't a whole bunch of external providers. So it wouldn't be too difficult to create a database. It's just for schools to be able to, say, okay, we do need help externally. Obviously, in an ideal and perfect world, in a perfect school that has all the resources, they'd be able to teach it themselves. But that's not the reality. And a lot of schools are at a disadvantage depending on their area, their location, how many students they have, how many teachers they have. So they do rely on external providers. Irregardless of if you have the best models, they will still use external providers. So would there be no place for a database so that they can...
Well, I suppose it's not something that we have looked at to date. It's like, as with everything, we would take that away and consider it, but I think that we will probably also, our first focus has been, I suppose, on the teachers and the resources to support the teachers, but in that context, we would certainly look at what else was out there. Yeah.
Just to say, we very much in the HSE support the Department of Education and its efforts just around trying to build the skills and competencies and confidence around teachers, and completely take your point around there being a need for additional supports and targeted interventions. I think the work that the HRB are doing at the moment in trying to map prevention initiatives across the country, and ourselves in the HSE Public Health, looking to see from a needs assessment perspective what's happening, what are the strengths, what are the gaps. I think we can see that there are parts of the country where that external support is there, be it through HSE education officers, be it through drug and alcohol task forces with dedicated prevention education officers. But we do see that it's patchy, and that it's not always using the most evidence-based approaches as well. And the Department of Health are rolling out some training around the European Union Drugs Agency, their prevention curriculum. And that, I suppose, compiles the evidence base from an international perspective on what's effective in schools. But we also have some really good practice in Ireland as well, some homegrown initiatives Just one off the top of my head, just there's an initiative in the Midwest, the Let's Learn About Alcohol and Other Drugs programme that's been run in schools, and that's working with parents and the sessions with parents and young people as well. So I think the challenge for us is not having a national a kind of infrastructure, I suppose, to identify the good practice where it's happening, and also to support. We hear a lot on the ground as well, just there being a challenge in getting access to funding, maybe to do data analysis, research, etc., just to build the evidence base of some of those homegrown projects. So from our perspective, we'd really love to see that development of an infrastructure to support communities to select evidence-based prevention programmes, but ones that meet the needs of their local context, and there may be adaptations required to I suppose, put those evidence-based approaches into settings as well. But thank you.
I don't know, my time is up.
I promise I won't take it long. Just, it's an HRB study of prevention services in Ireland. A piece of work with the UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and trying to assess the extent to which our prevention services are adhering to those prevention standards. So it's a survey that's on a year. It's almost complete. It won't have the database that you're thinking about, but at least we'll be able to understand and know those services that do provide that input into schools, and if the work is based on the standards and evidence, and so on. So it's not exactly what you're talking about, but it's in that space. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for the work that you are doing in this area, because it is quite a complex area and there's a lot of challenges in it. And also thank you for your presentations here this morning. Could I just go there to the statement from the Department of Education and Youth, and you talked about the briefing of 2,400 teachers have attended training, and I'm just wondering, you're talking about people obviously who already have experience even before they go to training. I'm just wondering, is there any feedback from them as regards how the service and the supports could be improved in our schools? And obviously it's a two-way process. Any training that you have it's about getting information out and about helping people to deal with issues. But I'm just wondering what's the level of feedback back, and as regards areas that they've identified that may not be incorporated into the training.
So the training, the 2,400 teachers that are referred to, that is the training that IDA has provided on the SPG curriculum at junior cycle and at senior cycle. So that 2,400 is teachers who have attended both of those trainings. The feedback has been very positive, actually, is what IDA have reported to us, that teachers are happy with the training, that it is providing them with a very good insight and a very good introduction to the teaching of SPHE. Some teachers who would go to the training would be, I suppose, already SPHE teachers and are kind of availing of the training in order to teach the updated curriculum, and then others would be new to SPHE.
Just can I go back then to about the supports that schools want? For instance, I was in a school in the last few weeks where I would say out of the students, and this is a second level school, out of the students there, 20% would be regarded by the teachers in there as at risk. And I'm just wondering, in that scenario, about the supports for teachers, the additional supports that teachers will require dealing with a situation like this. This is in a DESH area, and I'm just wondering, do we have adequate supports there, and is there further work that we can do to provide those supports for teachers?
So I think the supports would be coming from, might I hand over to you, Gráinne, because I think we're talking about NEPs and so on.
Yeah, I suppose, supports. So say NEPs provide a lot of supports to schools, and that would include things like general support and advice from a NEP psychologist, either through the school's own assigned NEP psychologist or through the NEP's advisory support line. And the NEPS advisory support line provides access to schools who currently don't have an assigned psychologist. And also NEPS have a national and regional support and development service for all school staff, and that would be advertised through the education support centres, and it would cover areas such as trauma-informed practice, cluster group support for post-primary special education teachers and special class teachers, and training for student support teams, and supporting reluctant school attendance as well, and school avoidance behaviour.
Okay. Can I just touch on two other areas just briefly? One is in relation to the use of sport organisations as regards getting a message out there, and particularly where you have people who are involved in sports organisations, but they have people who are not involved in sports. And I'm talking about young people, because I think even if you go down to the juvenile court any day, about 90% of the children that are in there are not involved in any sports organisation, and how you can, I suppose, work with sports organisations to get young people who are not involved in, and that's one area. And the second area I just want to touch on is those who have dropped out of school. I was involved in a project going back a long number of years myself, where young people would have dropped out of school, most would have been referred into us by the Gardaí. We provided training 5 days a week and then helped people to get into employment. And in fact, we did a survey of people who had left us 5 years earlier. Over 70% of them were in full-time employment. And most of these were people who were initially referred into us by the Gardaí. And I'm just wondering, are we doing enough in that area, and what can we do? What further action can we take in those two areas?
Well, I can...
Sure, we'll bring Ms O'Brien. Did you have your hand up as well? No. So I was just going to think about first, no problem. Yeah, please.
I can just maybe respond on the question about sport. So one of the things that we have supported in the Department of Education is a programme called the Active School Flag. So that's something that has just been launched at post-primary level. Actually, it's been in place at primary level for a number of years. And that is really about, well, I suppose the purpose of that is around physical activity and from a health and wellbeing perspective. But what it also does do is allow people who, young people who maybe don't see themselves as sporty or active in that way, it provides them with, we hope, an entry point into physical activity. And the Active School Flag programme then also connects with other sporting organisations, including GAA, for example, but also the local sports partnerships. So it's a really, I suppose, strong programme in terms of trying to connect our young people, through their school setting, linking them with kind of community and sporting opportunities in the community as well, and physical activity opportunities in the community.
Okay.
I can come in on some of the out of school piece. Yes. Yeah. I suppose just to say that the Department of Education and Youth for a number of years has provided out of school alternative education provision for children who for various reasons haven't been able to thrive in mainstream schools. And some of this started in the 1970s with the establishment of the 5 youth encounter projects. So we fund a number of these alternative settings. And the DESH plan that was published in 2017 contained a commitment to review out-of-school education provision. And that review was completed and it was published in 2022. So the Minister at that point established an implementation group to progress the recommendations in the 2022 report. So that group comprised all the relevant stakeholders, and it met for...
Can I just say about people who drop out of school, I think it's not just, dealing with the students themselves, you're also dealing with, I suppose, parents and family support. You're also, in a lot of cases, dealing with the Gardaí as well. So it's a whole lot of people that you need to involve, and I'm just wondering, are we coordinating that enough as regards getting people, and this is what the project I was involved in, getting everyone involved so that there's a better outcome for the young person, rather than going down the route of criminal activity or into the whole drugs world?
Yeah, well, I suppose, Deputy, with the review of out of school, I think we had all the relevant areas around the table looking at that review. And then I suppose just to talk about the settings that the Department of Education provides the funding to funds at the moment. For example, the 5 youth encounter projects, they get very, very intensive support so that they can provide an individual education plan to each of those students and provide a kind of therapeutic support to them as well. And that would include things like summer provision. It would include a youth worker in those schools. It would include like provision of hot meal in the school during the day. So and it would also link them into various community services as well, like the youth sector.
Thank you, Ms. Regan, and thank you, Deputy. Your time is, we've gone 1 minute and 20 seconds over. Senator Fitzpatrick, you had notified the committee you were switching with Deputy James O'Connor, so if you want.
Okay, Gurmagad, thank you, Gurmagad Cahirlock, and thank you all. Apologies, we had votes in the Shannon. Thank you for coming in today. It's really important the work you do, and both formal and informal support of young people. I think it was the HSE stats, 2/3 of young people have abused alcohol, 60% of young people have used cocaine, and about 1/3 have used drugs of some respect or other. They're really depressing statistics. Like, they are just utterly depressing. And I say that as a mother of young adults, and I say that as a parent more so than as a public representative. And I'm also a founding director of a youth service and a justice youth diversion programme. And I know the incredible work that youth services and families and schools and clubs do with our young people. But it's just very clearly not enough. It's just not enough by any measure. And so our challenge, I guess, is I'm a firm believer in prevention in every respect, avoid trouble if you can. And so we need to bring forward really strong recommendations for a comprehensive health-led approach. So my first question, I suppose, is it's actually going to relate to the UBU, the funding. Like, those stats are, as I say, very depressing, but they're very global. Like, 2/3 of young people having abused alcohol, 60% using cannabis. And yet UBU funding is targeted at marginalised young people. And Justice Youth Diversion funding is targeted at, again, marginalised people and young people and families who have come to the attention of the Gardaí, the Justice Youth Diversion. So I suppose my question is, why are we not looking to support young people outside of the formal school setting? Because, I don't want to in any way take away from the value of the work that has been done in the formal school setting. But there's an incredible opportunity in the youth space, in the outside of the formalised, timetabled work that is done in schools and in clubs and in other training environments, to inform and to support young people to make healthy decisions, to be more critical of their choices, of their own choices, to empower them, and to help them build resilience. So why aren't we expanding our funding to make it more globally available to all young people, considering the stats that we have as a society? And following on from that, like, one of our big struggles as part UBU funded youth services is we don't get multi-annual funding. In fact, actually, as voluntary board director for years since 2008, we struggle every year because we actually have to worry about what is our funding going to be, and we're employing 8 people. So we're responsible as their employers. And it is a real struggle for us each year to contend with that, and it doesn't send a signal to youth service providers and to youth service practitioners that they're valued, that their work is valued, that it's seen, and I just think we should, if we're going to really invest in our young people and in equipping them to make the right decisions and the healthy decisions so that they can fully contribute to our society, in a way that is critically informed and is resilient and is sustainable, we should look at that. So I'm just wondering if the Department of Education and Youth could respond to that, please.
So I suppose I'll attempt to respond to that.
Thank you.
So, I should say that I don't work in that area myself, so some of what you ask we may need to bring back to you later. But I suppose I can say that the funding that is provided for youth is both the UBU services, as you've mentioned, and then there's also funding that's made available to other youth organisations and youth services. So, and that's like, I suppose, quite a significant amount as well overall, and that can go to different, I suppose, it can go to different organisations providing different services. But obviously there is a very significant focus on UBU. The funding the funding has increased year on year since 2020. And I think the increase that has been provided overall is about 22 million over the last 5 years. And the funding for 2026 is also an additional 8 million on top of that. So it is increasing. And I suspect, and I don't know, and I will come back with more detail, but I suspect that the answer to that question really is that there is obviously a priority initially on the services for those who are most at risk and most vulnerable, and that probably has to be the priority. But I think maybe in terms of the detail underneath that, if we can come back with a more detailed answer and follow up for you.
Thank you, Celeste, and I appreciate your reply, and I think that would be really helpful for the committee if the department was able to come back to us on that, because while funding has increased, and I acknowledge that, costs have increased, our population have increased, needs have increased, particularly youth population needs. If you consider COVID and the impact that COVID had, the social isolation, the social dysfunction that came with that and the consequences of it, all of that have massively increased the needs for supports. The costs have very, very significantly increased. We don't get any funding for administration, and yet all of our funding is dependent, like literally dependent on the administration, whatever about the quality of the youth service. So that would be really helpful if you could come back to us with that. And because there is just tremendous work being done by youth services up and down the country, and I am regularly struck by the thoughts and the experience of meeting some young people who actually don't get to engage in youth services at all. They don't get to meet an adult who isn't a teacher, who isn't a parent, who isn't a family member, who isn't a medical practitioner, who isn't meeting them in a formal setting and actually just engaging with them at their own level. It's invaluable. And as a society, I think we should be able to do that. And we should invest in it, because we will get better adults. We will get healthier adults.
Thank you,
I see my time is up, Chair, but I'll come back in again.
Thank you, Senator. Deputy O'Murcu, 7 minutes.
As I say, some of this is almost the same conversation. I was at the Children's Committee earlier, and we were looking at the whole space of child poverty, child deprivation, and then the early interventions. And I suppose it's, we don't have enough of them. It's basically we always need more. We need more resources, and we need to make sure we actually give an interagency solution. Look, I've seen it myself at times where school settings sometimes are the campuses that are best served for, offering those type of resources. I suppose I would start from the point of view, look, if we accept, and I'm sure the HRB can, add to this, like the situation and circumstances in relation to drug use and the chaos and the crime and all that comes from it is like through the roof, even if you compare to 5 or 10 years ago. And I suppose what I'm really asking, because it's almost the same question I'm asking, it's what is the needs analysis in relation to the resources we need at this point in time to offer a service? And I'm accepting that there needs to be a service across the board, because there's a huge amount of people who fall into addiction. We've always had addiction issues in Ireland, but there are very specific issues that particularly happen then in deprived working class areas. And we talk about early intervention, we talk about multidisciplinary, we talk about interagency and all of government, but we rarely see it. And I would be happy enough if we at least had the right questions in front of us, and then we could find the answers. If anyone's willing to take that on.
Who's up for the challenge?
Well, I suppose just to echo what you said, as someone who's, like I said, a post-primary school principal for 10 years, I would love to get my hand on an agency, multidisciplinary group that would help me when needed in the early intervention space to help a child that's in crisis or a child in need. But when you go back to the practicalities of actually running a school, we speak of trauma-informed practice, we speak of restorative practices in our school. Where do we put it in? Where do we find the time and space as a principal? Like we introduce restorative practice before we even have to consider trauma-informed practice. And to introduce restorative practice into my school with over 60 teachers in the school meant that me and the deputy principal had to provide supervision to 4 classes at a time, where every single member of staff, over 18 months, where every single member of staff got trained in 8 hours of basic restorative practice training. So absolutely there's an ideal out there, but the practicalities in schools is incredibly difficult. So the only response,
intensive if you're serious
100%, it's absolutely reserved. So we identified the need as restorative practice was an absolute crucial piece to running our school in terms of early intervention prevented. But it meant that the principal and the deputy principal had to prioritise it, and everything else was parked at that time. If we could plug into interdisciplinary extra agency support, we'd be in a far better place in the upstreaming, helping our young people.
And you're literally talking there about the reactive piece, and I suppose the other piece is that early intervention, because in many cases people know families that are in difficulties early on. And schools are very good at finding these issues, you know, and you could intervene cheaper, quicker, better.
100%. It's the hidden harm. It's identifying that hidden harm, and that's through homeschool community liaison, an actual person that can go and visit homes, that can read the room in terms of, right, that child now hasn't been attending and so on, but also going to school completion programme, identifying those at early risk of leaving school and so on. So it's the restoration and the building on key personnel in schools is crucial.
No, but you can't put it all on schools either. Does
No,
anyone
you
else
can't.
want to follow on with that?
Dr. Jean?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think prevention, early intervention, it can be very challenging to make the case for the investment, given the huge needs, the huge range of needs that are there. I think back to Senator Fitzpatrick's point as well, I think the statistics are really depressing, but I think we have, certainly when it comes to alcohol, I think they've become quite normalised within society. We're up against a huge challenge of trying to challenge that. But I do think the good news is that we do know, when there is a good evidence base around what does work. We have some really good models of good practice even within Ireland. I'm thinking of the area-based childhood programme, for example, really strong prevention early intervention programme. The challenge is, I think, is getting the investment to bring these types of initiatives to scale.
We're brilliant at pilots and having, you know, because the ABC, you know, Gavin McGee was here from ABC earlier, and they said, we've 12 of these across the state. Like when we're talking about home visits, we're talking about, what was it, you know, 2 for the 2 part-time.
Yeah, your earlier mentoring, a whole range of supports. But I think, like, we do have evidence of what works, and we can look to other countries as well who have achieved great things. If you look at Iceland, who've managed to really dramatically reduce their alcohol and drug use through a range of measures, both policy measures, but also things, leisure cards that all children and young people have access to structured, planned leisure activities and freely provided. So I suppose just to offer a little bit of hope that, you know, we do have really good, strong evidence around what does work, but I think the real challenge is getting the resourcing into those.
And that's for the not so complex cases right through to the very complex cases, and that we generally leave till far too late. And look, we've seen some of these pieces in the news, you know, and they're dreadful circumstances. Anyone else looking to finish up? Because, right, look, you're all going to talk about, you know, certain aspects, whether we're talking about addiction services or whether we're talking about whatever preventative measures that are being operated within educational settings. But I would like to ask, you know, for all you've seen that works, what would you need in relation to having a proper system that actually worked for you in your setting? Like you've always been clear, and that's probably only a first step, you know.
Answer that, just to say that I suppose the things that we are doing, I suppose the elements that are important from an education perspective and capturing the children that we deal with would be the curriculum piece, which I do think is really important in terms of skill building for children and providing them with I suppose, the skills, the coping skills, the decision-making skills and all of that to deal with what comes to them. Obviously, the social inclusion, the range of social inclusion elements, including the DESH scheme, the homeschool community liaison, the wellbeing and NEP support. So they are, I suppose, all elements, given that this is, you know, a multidimensional problem. So these are the elements, and I suppose where we would, if you bring it into the specific lens of this committee, when the, you know, as the new national drug strategy is developed, we would hope to, I suppose, be willing to, hoping to collaborate and work with the Department of Health. But we would see that, I suppose, as the national policy framework within which these things could be reflected.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Deputy O'Murray. I just have some questions myself. Professor Smyth, I was interested when you talked about the research after growing up in Ireland research. I think one of the comments you mentioned was the fact that people from more affluent backgrounds are likely to enter drug use probably when they're a little bit older. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what's that, in their 20s, 18s to 20s?
18 to 20.
So they've come through a skills system. Can you reverse engineer that for me? So what supports are in place in the skills systems that they may have come through? Because if the propensity is cross-societal, what supports would have been in place in the skills systems that would have maybe held that kind of engagement in drug use off until they were in their 18s to 20s?
So the same study did look at risk and protective factors that were evident at the age of 17. There was 3% of the survey participants used before age 17, and that rose to 20% by age 20. At the age of 17, the characteristics associated with greater risk of use were some of the ones that we'd be more familiar with. It was, I think, parental substance use was there as a factor. The drug use within the community was there as a factor.
And that's still in the affluent cohort?
Sorry?
And that's still in the affluent cohort?
No, that was at the age of 17. Okay. So it's who commenced use between the ages of 17 and 20. Again, it was those who began drinking at an earlier age. It was males, people who lived in urban settings, particularly Dublin. The socioeconomic factors weren't particularly strong, but if there was any slight trend, it was just a slight trend towards those from more affluent backgrounds. So it's more the point really is that socioeconomic background by the age of 20 isn't certainly a predictor of cocaine use.
Okay. Thank you. For the Health Research Board, could you tell us about the trends that are actually in place in, given your own research, what trends are in place in Irish skills systems at the moment? What's the drug use of choice? How has it been, how are children getting hold of it? What's your research on?
There are two big school surveys. There's the SPED survey and the ASC survey. The HBSC is probably it's a general health survey, but it includes our surveys 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds, and it's cannabis again is the main it's the main illegal drug. I would say that the prevalence of alcohol is coming down a bit, so that's one important thing to note, and it's optimistic. As Bobby pointed out, the early initiation of alcohol use is a good predictor of difficulty with other drugs in adulthood, and so on. Where people are getting it, it's not covered in detail, in the survey. So it's usually friends at that age. You don't have a kind of a relationship with the dealer at that.
Thank you. I suppose I'd like to understand from the principals, is that kind of research, does that capture your on-the-ground experience? Because I suppose in schools, I would have seen a lot of kids, you would have heard stories of kids with balloons or these different things that are coming in and out of trends. So does that kind of research capture the on-ground experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose there'd be an absolute call for more research in that area. But I mean, young people in schools are incredibly inventive in terms of what happens in schools, in terms of drug use, even the use of vapes in schools, of distribution of same. It's impossible almost to keep up with what the next trend is, what the next substance misuse is, and so on. So again, that preventative but early intervention space of knowing and having enough key personnel in your schools to be able to identify a change in behaviour, a disengagement from school, absenteeism, or all of a sudden some young person is turning up in school all of a sudden, that we haven't seen in months and so on. So it's being able to read what's actually happening with the young people in our schools, but having teachers absolutely that can be highly skilled and highly trained in delivering SPHE curriculum. They're only one part of a much larger jigsaw in terms of the school community and its engagement with homes in that space. They are absolutely indicative of what's happening, but we'd love more of same to aid us in terms of identifying those trends.
And in terms of when it comes to secondary prevention, are the appropriate supports in place? Absolutely. I know everybody's trying their best and would like to do more, but when it comes to secondary prevention of a teenager coming forward or actually being discovered to be in some sort of throes of drug addiction or even the sale of drugs to fund the drug addiction, what are the supports are available?
And I suppose just going back to what Senator Fitzpatrick said there in terms of the informal space as well outside of it, I think when when we're distinguishing between prevention and early intervention, schools are excellent in the early intervention space. We identify something that's going wrong and we put a support in place for a child within the resources available to us. In the preventative space, leaning on something that Jim Lings from Jigsaw said not so long ago with NAPD, preventative space is a far greater societal piece that must include all stakeholders, including parents in the very first instance. But that depends on parents that have capacity that aren't themselves already, affected in the addiction space. So, we need to be really careful not to put the burden of full societal prevention on schools. That it's a much larger piece, but we're really good in terms of the targeted early interventions. So I think it's a bigger conversation, but one that we welcome.
Yeah, and it's definitely one that I suppose as a committee we want to engage in, so we
Sure.
absolutely wouldn't be placing the full responsibility on skills. I think anyone would hold that belief, but we are conscious skills are often a sanctuary for young people who are finding so in that space where a young person has that one good adult often in school, inevitably you come forward, they will get all of the support within the availability, but I suppose where I'm wondering is what is actually available in reality.
Yeah.
So
there are great programmes in schools. So, for example, under the old National Behavioural Support Services, great programmes in school, like, for example, Check and Connect, where, depending, say, for example, in my school, every single staff member was trained in Check and Connect. That meant that there were 60 adults engaging with 60 children, and they met with them formally and informally several times throughout the week, just literally a conversation to Check and Connect. And I suppose going back to what Senator Ryan said about engaging in external services, very often, if you look at the teaching demographic, teachers generally are from a particular background with a particular level of educational expertise and so on, that very often if we engage in with external people that can share the story of the impact of addiction with our young people in schools, it's sharing that story can be really, really powerful. We can be very, very trained in terms of SPHE and so on, but we may or may not have the personal experience that may have an impact in terms of our young people. There are wonderful programmes going on throughout the SPHE. As I said, Know Your Score from the HSE is a fabulous programme. The SPHE one, the three different strands in terms of SPHE and the likes of Check and Connect are really effective, but again, it's consistency and coherence in approach of them in our schools is really, really important.
Thank you. I'm conscious my time is up, but yeah.
Just one point on that. On a previous Growing Up in Ireland paper, and international studies show that a good presence in school, that if there's good an activity in school, if people feel at home and comfortable in school, it's a big protective factor. So it isn't only just about education on drugs, or information on drugs, or resilience and so on. If children feel that they're in a good space in school, that they belong, it's very good for protecting as well.
Thank you. So we go to second round of questions, and we'll go back to the road. I think it's 4 minutes, and Deputy Graves, you're first.
Just a statement rather than a question. I think, look, it's a really interesting conversation about the change in patterns in terms of drug use, but also drug users and, their demographics and age, I suppose, is a concerning one. And I think it's a work that we as a committee need to look at is how do the services, but also the forthcoming drug strategy, make sure that we respond to those changes If you have any suggestions, more than happy to hear them, but I think it's something as a committee we really need to concentrate on.
Thank you, Deputy Graves. The next speaker is Deputy James O'Connor, who'll switch with Deputy Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. Can I ask, actually, I think picking up, I'm not sure, Aisling or Rachel, one of you used the word there, consistent, actually, and you both referenced that there are great programmes, there are great pilots. We have been able to prove the concepts, develop the concepts, prove the concepts, and my question, I guess, is both Department of Education and the HSE then. What mechanisms are in place to evaluate the consistency of delivery across all geographic areas? And more importantly, I suppose, to identify where there is an inconsistency or an absence even of resources and to correct that. And specifically with regards to, obviously, prevention, education and awareness.
I suppose I referenced the HSE Public Health Needs Assessment on drug and alcohol prevention that's commenced and will run into the early part of next year. But I suppose that's an attempt to try and map across the country. It's a national needs assessment, but it will break down by health region what's happening, what are the strengths, what are the gaps. We won't be going into huge detail in terms of what's happening in individual schools and communities and settings, but it is an attempt to try and get a national picture of what's working well, where are the gaps, and then the plan is to develop an implementation plan for the HSE in terms of how we can strengthen our prevention. I think at the moment we don't really have an implementation infrastructure to support both the identification of really good practice, and we need investment in research and evaluation to even demonstrate some of that impact, but we don't then have an infrastructure to support how we would scale that up and support communities across the country to scale up good practice. So I think that's something we'd love to see in terms of the next national drug strategies. How do we build that infrastructure and then that prevention workforce that can support the delivery of that?
So that's great, and it's a really valuable piece of work. When do you think you'll have even an early version of the findings and early indications? It would be incredibly valuable for this committee if we could get some insight into it or some visibility of it before we complete our work.
Of course, we'd be really happy to share a copy with you. And we're aiming for a first draft by the end of Q1 next year, so March. But yeah, we'd be really, really happy to share once available.
That would be great if we could get that. And I suppose the Department of Education, like Rachel has very eloquently articulated the challenges of running busy schools and all of the demands on teachers and the school environment. But consistency of delivery of the SPHE, like I saw the numbers, I think it was it 1,000 teachers had completed, or maybe that was a HSE number, and I think it was 2,400 from the Department of Education in 2024 and 2025. Like how many teachers are actually actively engaged in teaching on a daily basis in the country? And so, like as a proportion, 2,400, is that?
Those 2,400 teachers would have been trained in relation to the post-primary curriculum, either at junior cycle or senior cycle. So it's quite a significant number, as against the overall number of schools. I suppose it's fair to say that SPHE teaching, SPHE, a teacher may move in or out of teaching SPHE. They may not necessarily teach it every year, so that number is probably a reflection that some teachers might be trained, but may not. A different teacher may require the training the following year. So we're aware of that, I suppose, and would encourage schools to try and have like a core SPHE team, and that's what a lot of this training is focused on. In terms of consistency, there's a couple of things I'd say. I suppose one is we have put a big focus, as I've said, on trying to ensure that teachers can avail of training. We have put a big focus on trying to ensure that good classroom resources are available for them so that they can address the learning outcomes within SPHE, and the HSE and NEPS and the NCCA have worked really closely with us on that, so we are able to avail, I suppose, of the HSE's expertise in relation to prevention for those. And then the third piece, obviously, is the role of the inspectorate in carrying out SPHE inspections and looking at what's happening there. And in those roles, they tend to, you know, an inspector will talk to the students in a school as well as the teachers in relation to carrying out a subject inspection like that. The fourth piece, which I think is really important, is that the new curriculum specifications will be subject to evaluation, and that's in general for junior cycle. There would be what we call an early enactment review after any subject has been through a 3-year cycle. So for SPHE junior cycle, which was introduced in all schools in September 2023, we would see the review happening in 2026, and that again will get the views of teachers and students in relation to their experience of how SPHE was taught and whether it has been useful for them. So I think that's a really important piece, and it will also happen at senior cycle.
Sorry, Celeste, I'm going to have to move on if that's okay, because I know Senator Ryan is looking to your next on the list.
Yeah, my question is kind of more of like a blue sky question. I think what Ms O'Connor said is, you know, it's fantastic, and it does take more than just a school setting. The onus cannot just be on the school, it's on the community, it's on us, as siblings, as families, as community groups and stuff like that. And young people know drugs are bad. They know that. Everybody, like, they know they're bad, but they're still going to use for a myriad of reasons. And some are using, you know, for the fact of the funness of it, the mystery of the use, but some also use to self-medicate and, you know, fill a hole and stuff like that. And when it does become problematic, a lot of the time drugs are a symptom of something bigger. They just ease the pain a lot of the time for people. So I suppose in your kind of ideal world, what would for young people, what would, I suppose, a prevention program look like? Because I think it does have to, if you're looking at prevention as opposed to intervention, you're looking at how young people manage their emotions a lot of the time, because they're growing up in a space now that's totally different to when I was in school. Equally, it's really great to hear that SPHE has come so far along, because when I was in school, it was horrendous and we didn't learn anything. The structures weren't there. A teacher just did it on the side and that was it. And all I learned was never to do heroin. But nothing else. So, like, in your ideal world, like, what would it look like to give young people a holistic approach to education around prevention, but like also looking at what else can we encompass into that without just saying, look, this is a drug, this is what it does, you shouldn't be using it, this is where you get help.
And I completely agree with you in terms of the SPHE. If you look at the health and wellbeing strand of SPHE, explore the determinants of good health. So in the very first instance, what does it look like? You know, so our young people know then when it's not right. Examine social norms, attitudes and beliefs related to alcohol, tobacco, vaping and substance use, and then explain the pathways towards addiction, the signs and consequences of different kinds of addictions. Going back to what my colleague from the Department of Education said earlier, it has to be age appropriate, delivered in a way consistent throughout primary to post-primary, to further ed and higher ed. So how early do we start in an age-appropriate way so that we can do that? But unless the family unit is involved in that conversation, you know, or other whatever situation a young person might find themselves in, the school, it's almost like 166 days a year in loco parentis. And outside of that, I saw it every single year. You leave your cohort to go, your students go at the Christmas holidays, and you know what they're facing into, and it's heartbreaking. And then they come back, and it takes up until February midterm break to bring them back down again and to re-establish order and boundaries in their lives. So it's very, very difficult. All we can do is from very, very early intervention age, as we said, consistently as possible. The SPHE specification itself went through robust, in fairness to the NCCA, went through robust consultation with a huge amount of stakeholders to get to this very point, to drag it into relevance, I suppose. It's once we deliver it in a consistent way with highly trained professionals across primary to post-primary, we'll be in a far better place than we were when we were in school. Probably me much earlier than you, but than where we were. We're in a far better place, but we just need to build on what's working in the system.
Celeste, I
was going to make a similar point, and I won't recap what Rachel has said, that SPHE teaching is really, like, there are lots of learning outcomes within SPHE that don't mention drugs or substance misuse, but are actually very relevant in terms of learning how to manage emotions, learning coping strategies for situations, social situations even, even learning at the more junior level and junior cycle about kind of your own sense of self and self-esteem and those kinds of things. So they're all really important. I suppose what I would say, if your question is what does a prevention program look like, I suppose we are acutely conscious that SPHE teaching can do so much, but it is one piece. And where a child is really struggling or really in trouble, an SPHE class is not the answer. So I suppose from that perspective, I think the importance of our work with the HSE, of collaboration with the Department of Health, and of making sure that I suppose, what we do in schools is informed by the expertise that exists in the health sector is really important.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ryan. Deputy Sherlock, you are next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I suppose I just have one question as to the HSE. And I suppose last week I raised the issue of the gap between when there's a knowledge of a new drug emerging in the system and when there would be a health awareness campaign rolled out by the HHC and with regards to HSE. And I used the example of HHC last week, and 3 years before we see something and legislation to outlaw it. So you might just talk through the process within the HSE at the moment that currently exists and perhaps the improvements that need to further take place so that we actually shorten that time for when a new drug emerges and when we actually get the information out there. And do you have to wait for the legislation? And I'd like to hear from both of you in that regard.
Okay, well, I suppose from my perspective, colleagues in HSE Social Inclusion who would be working with HSE Communications on the drugs.ie campaign, and that's very much taking a harm reduction approach, targeting people already using drugs. We have, on the alcohol side, we have an alcohol prevention communications campaign. I do think we can look at other areas where we need to focus more on the prevention rather than necessarily the harm reduction. And we are, at the moment, HSE Communications are leading out on the development of a new vaping prevention campaign. So that's funding we've received from the Department of Health to develop that campaign. And there's currently focus group testing research underway to design and implement that. But absolutely, we'd be really open to looking at how we can strengthen our communications, become more responsive, and really happy to follow up with colleagues working more directly with that if that's helpful as well.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to add anything, Smyth?
Yeah. I suppose one of the frustrations, with the current state of play is that really there's no one within the HSE actually has a lead responsibility for primary prevention of drugs. The health and well-being section, have led out on alcohol, but haven't historically had that mandate or the resources to lead out on drugs. Drugs.ie, as Aisling has mentioned, their focus is more on people who are already established drug users, trying to reduce the harm. So hopefully that's something that will change, but that will require some resourcing. With regard to the specific issues, though, I would say when a new drug does emerge, like HHC, there's a wariness to charge out with public information across the board initially, because what you may well be doing is just piquing people's interest in a new drug. So the challenge is to respond, I suppose, in a more targeted way. Where I'd like to see maybe a bit more public information will be around the drugs that everyone knows about. Like, we're not going to pique people's interest in drugs like cocaine or cannabis. Everyone has heard of them, but people would be better equipped with actual factual information so they can make more informed decisions about whether to step into those worlds or not. With drugs, with new trends, it's genuinely more challenging, and you're often trying to do something in a more targeted, localized way to focus information at the most at-risk group.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that. And I suppose just to say, I appreciate there's a timing in terms of when the appropriate juncture to actually make the awareness available. But I suppose I was kind of struck earlier this year, the HSE were telling us that they had been given the resources at that juncture to roll out a campaign. And I suppose it's, rather than having to be dependent on drug by drug, that the initiative can be taken within the HSE itself to actually roll out a campaign, as opposed to have to go hand in cap to look for resources for a specific campaign to be rolled out. It would seem to me that the campaign should be on the go the whole time and should be, responsive to the circumstances. So I think there is probably one of the challenges with regards to the new national drug strategy is to ensure that that clear funding line is there and that there shouldn't be any interruptions or indeed blockages in that regard. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Sherlock. Deputy Burke.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can I just ask, and it's to the Department of Further and Higher Education, in relation to our third-level colleges, have we looked at other jurisdictions as regards, can we learn from those as regards helping our third-level colleges as regards dealing with this challenge? And the second thing, I suppose, is, the two other issues. One is the extent of the challenges we have in third-level colleges. Has there any major research being done either by the HSE, the colleges themselves, or individual research done to know what the extent of the challenge is? And the final one there, you referred to the e-Shield project in University College Cork. I'm just wondering if you could maybe give a further explanation of that project. So that's to the Department of Further and Higher Education.
I can kick off on some of that. Just in actually terms of the piece around the international piece, when that, it obviously all of our the higher education institutions are their own organisations, so they are very well connected themselves across with other kind of European universities. So I actually think when that we look at all of actually the policies, procedures, strategies, communications they have all kind of, they are in kind of formed from actually the relationships sort of they have. So sort of that's sort of the first part there in terms of the e-Shield.
E-Shield, we might have to come back to you on that one, Deputy. I just don't have the details to hand. We can get a full note for you if that's okay.
And just on the research issue, have we extensive any research done in relation to what is the extent of the problem in our third level institutions? And for instance, even a simple thing of the number of people who've dropped out of college as a direct result of addiction issues. Like, has any research been done on that whole area?
What I say is that we kind of do have national data in terms of the World 2 survey, and it did drugs use survey in actually higher education, and again, I actually think it'd be helpful for the committee if we sent you a note through on sort of it does.
Okay.
Thanks. That'd be very helpful. I'm also conscious the Health Research Board might be able to provide some clarity.
No, I was going to refer to the third-level study on drug use. It's a very comprehensive study and very detailed. And e-Shield would have grown out of that, but been informed like that. So it's probably the best study that we could have on third-level on drug use among third-level students. And it was quite consistent with other prevalence studies on drugs. So with the Growing Up in Ireland survey and third level.
But looking at universities, do you believe that there's a sufficient amount of work being done by the university themselves in dealing with this challenge?
I couldn't comment on that, but I think the e-Shield programme is very innovative and progressive programme, and it's been in place for a number of years. That kind of approach intervention is, appropriate and useful.
Craig?
Just to add more from a data collection point of view, not so much on the research side. I mentioned earlier our National Drug Treatment Reporting System, which is collecting episodes of treatment for drug and alcohol addiction. One of our initiatives in the last year or two has been really to look at the provision of treatment services within the university and college sector, just to try to get a fuller picture of what's available for young people in terms of treatment. It's been difficult, I suppose, to get that connection and that kind of engagement with the colleges, but it's something we're very keen on doing because it adds to the fuller picture around treatment services.
Do you think colleges could do more in this area as regards, people who have particular issues? Is it a case of it's not our responsibility, where in real terms it's, I suppose, by we all working together that we can deal with issues like this? Do you think a lot more could be done by colleges on this issue?
I think the problem is we don't know the extent of the provision maybe in the colleges and universities. We do know that there are a range of services offered in all colleges and universities. What we'd like to do is to gather that information, to collect that information, to report more widely. So then we would understand.
Is there a proposal to do that?
It's the work that we're doing around looking at the coverage of the treatment system that we have.
Okay.
Thank you, Deputy. I'm very conscious Dr. Sheehan also has written in.
Yeah, sorry, that point. It's just around the issue. I'm just a little bit familiar with it, and there's a big digital component, a digital intervention component to that, but there's also UCC are also supporting the lead out on the new framework for addressing the use of illicit substances within higher education colleges. So a new steering group is just currently being established, and that framework is going to be implemented from next year. Professor Eamon Keenan in the HC, the Clinical Lead for Addiction, will be chairing that group. So that's my understanding that there'll be a focus on that from 2026 onwards.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Morgan, you're second round.
Dr. Sheehan, you spoke about a national needs assessment. Could you just give me some detail on that?
Sure, yes. So this is an initiative being led by HSC Public Health, and it's a needs assessment on drug and alcohol prevention. So there's a whole range of methods being used. It's looking at the epidemiological data on drugs and alcohol, mainly drawing on sources of evidence from the Health Research Board and other sources of evidence. There's also, we're just currently designing a national survey of the population, and that's going to be delivered in conjunction with Ipsos, looking at community perspectives around drug and alcohol use. There's also, we've also completed focus groups. We've completed focus groups with coordinators of drug and regional and local drug and alcohol task forces, and then people working across different sectors, early years, education and youth and community. And we're also planning early in the new year to do very in-depth community needs assessment with two specific communities, one in an urban area and one in a rural. This is a collaboration with RCSI. So there's a whole range of methods being used for the needs assessment. Also feeding into that is the work the HRB have already referenced, the REPS initiative.
What would the timeline be?
So we should have a draft report ready hopefully by the end of March 2026, and I was saying to Senator Fitzpatrick, we're really happy to share that with the committee.
Oh, here, just on some level, that's brilliant. Like here, in the sense of actually here finding out what the need is, what are the issues, and I accept there's an issue in relation to like what is prevention. Particularly when we're talking about young people. Like young people generally think they're going to live forever. You then have more complex cases where people are going to take drugs from a point of view of dealing with their own set of circumstances, and here we all know the issues as regards intergenerational trauma, poverty, and all those obstacles to getting beyond that. But look, see the fact that you're taking it from across the board, because on some level I was going to say, like, we can't expect educational institutes, be the third level, be the second level, to be able to deal with everything. In fairness, I think what you spoke about yourself, the fact that you needed a service, like you can be part of something, but you can't necessarily create it yourself. That probably is the case, and it's very hard to see how a national drug strategy can just exist over here in health. And I get that officials from the department said they wouldn't. There would be a fair amount of engagement, across the board. Because look here, as I say, talking about child deprivation, talking about any of these interrelated issues, like talk about justice and youth diversion projects and whatever. see if we're not putting a strategy together that takes all this into play, and we deal with everything from the addiction services that are required across the board right down to these complex cases, I think we will continue just to fail. And that's accepting that, like, drugs are going to be with us for a long time, and there is no, justice stroke policing solution to it that sometimes, unfortunately, people still think is out there.
Yeah, I'm conscious at the end. I think in prevention services we don't have a good sense of the extent of prevention service. We know that there's a lot of good work is going on at the moment, but unlike treatment services, we don't have a good picture of them. So our REP study is going to have an account of all the prevention services outside of schools.
Which is absolutely necessary. Well, here it's good that this has been done. It's a pity, I suppose, an awful lot of this wasn't done before, but we're starting from here, and I suppose we need to get a picture, and then I imagine all of this is going to show the huge gaps that there are, and again, it's a holistic intervention we need, interagency. As I say, I nearly bore myself at these terms at this stage, but
Thank you, Deputy Amurkio. I think it's my question now. I suppose my question is somewhat related to where Deputy Amurkio finished. Is how much does neurodiversity and undiagnosed neurodiversity play a role in what we're discussing today? Like, I'm very conscious, one of the reasons I can sit here for 2 hours and be attentive now is because I take ADHD medication most mornings, which I wouldn't have had when I was a younger person. I would imagine my teachers would have got the brunt of that. But so how much of what we're discussing now, if you talked about self-medication, dealing with their own set of circumstances, is access to early intervention in relation to issues of neurodiversity also culminate in some young people self-medicating when they get a little bit older and access? Does that come up in any of your research? Yeah, Dr. Smyth, Professor Smyth.
I suppose the issue with ADHD, we've known for decades that young people with ADHD are more likely to head down a path of substance use, particularly if it's untreated. So difficulties with treatment access are obviously then problematic. But the issue with autism or autistic spectrum disorder is definitely an escalating challenge. Maybe it's something we were oblivious to 10 or 15 years ago, but it's part of our day-to-day work at this stage. I'd say 20% of the young people accessing our service have that diagnosis, and certainly the delays in young people accessing appropriate assessments and supports is problematic, because as you sort of say, for some young people with autism, they can be sensorily overwhelmed by just the regular world, and may find that by taking substances they can just dial themselves down, and obviously we'd much rather they had other coping strategies to deal with that rather than using substances.
Okay, thank you, Professor Smyth. Do we know how many young people have been either excluded, expelled from school based on some level of drug-related, either taking drugs or being involved with drugs? Do we capture the data of how many young people are excluded or expelled from school, and then also afterwards, where did they asked to go, and what supports are in place? That's for the department.
Yeah, Deputy, I concur on that. I suppose Tuesday Education Support Service, the Education Welfare Service, they're responsible for statutory school attendance, so they would collect data from schools each year on an annual basis on the number of students that are expelled. And back in September, they published the data for the 23-24 school year. So that report is available on TUSLA's website. Now, while it does publish the numbers of students expelled in both primary and post-primary schools and in special schools, it doesn't break them down on the reason why the student was expelled.
Okay, I imagine that might be helpful to the Health Research Board. But okay, fantastic. If any of us have anything you would want to say or haven't had the chance to say, please feel free to take it now if there's anything you feel has been overlooked in the engagement. No?
I just want to go back to some of the questions raised and say that we will provide, it was Deputy Burke had talked about dropouts, and my colleagues in the Department of Education that had answered queries there. We had also spoken about the Youth Reach programme, so I actually think a note actually for the committee, a short note would be helpful. And the other queries raised for the Ferris was from Deputy Graves around support on education in prisons and afterwards in terms of probation services. Again, we have a short note here that we're very happy to send on to the committee.
Into the committee. Perfect. Thank you all. That was incredibly interesting. I know we'll be. Yes, Professor Smyth.
I suppose when you look at some of the data, you can feel a bit pessimistic, as Senator Fitzpatrick alluded to. Yeah. But maybe it's worth reminding ourselves of one of the successes we've achieved as a society. You know, there was a horrendous heroin problem which affected young people, again, particularly from very deprived backgrounds in the 1990s and into the noughties. But we've been tremendously successful at avoiding that, or ensuring that that particular problem hasn't found its way into subsequent generations. And at least I suppose that is a note of success. Trying to figure out exactly how we achieve that success is harder to answer, but it was a complex, multifaceted approach which has its origins probably in our first national drug strategy.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Smyth, and thank you to all for giving us your expertise today. It's really, really helpful. Thank you. Oh, the meeting is now adjourned until the 27th of November at 12:30.
So there we go. Yeah, that was an informative meeting as of, again. Took a lot of notes there as to what they're doing within the education system. It does seem that they are missing an opportunity there to actually engage with those at risk, even those not really at risk, people who might just kind of, I would just say experiment and then kind of go on, but really those are at risk in of addiction, of drug abuse and stuff, they're really missing an opportunity there to engage with them, because the prohibition pushes those people away. They label them as criminal, they stigmatise them, they make them feel worthless, you know, junkies and all of that stuff. And that's because of prohibition. You know, Bobby Smith brought that in there at the very end, getting the last word in about the heroin epidemic that we were kind of facing and how it was a success, and he doesn't really know how that works. I'd imagine he'd get prohibition in there, how we criminalise the heroin dealers and all of that. But sorry, buddy, still heroin dealers around the place. But yeah, there was, again, as I say, that absence of that question, you know, how is prohibition helping all of this? It's not. It's not. Some very good points made there as well by people in the hot box. It was good. Good being able to converse with you there throughout it and engage, kind of get that live commentary within the hot box. I have a doctor appointment there in the next 20 minutes. I'll be getting collected there. My phone should ring any minute. I'm glad I was able to make it though to the end of that. And to be able to end the stream here shortly and not be watching on the YouTube, leaving the stream endlessly while I'm up with the doctors. Comments there as well in the end about cannabis being available here and across in the north. And there was a link there to an article that was sent out. Give me a second, I'll drag it up on screen just as we're here before I get collected. Boom, there it is. Disagree. So Donegal judge dismisses drug charge for dirty man prescribed medical cannabis. So the guys were talking about neurodiversity and all of that. To the best of my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, but the guys were talking about ADHD, and that is one of the ailments that is listed for the use of cannabis over in the north and in the UK. So people in the north can be seen as patients, and people down here seen as criminals. But one man living above in Derry, I believe, Derry, and he travelled across to Donegal for whatever reasons. It's probably here within the article. But he found himself before a judge, and the judge seen and recognised the guy's legitimate use of cannabis as a medicine, and struck out the charges against him. And does it say here as to what he went through? Was he arrested or anything? €30 worth of cannabis, so a gram and a half of cannabis. Strong smell coming from the vehicle. Gardaí located a blue jacket in which there were 2 white containers, known containers for the medical cannabis above in the north. Cautioned, containers were taken, or were they taken? Yeah, they would have been taken, alright, as they criminalised them. So this, as Beamanish was saying there earlier, sets precedent here for patients, I suppose, from the north to be able to come over here. I know Alan Robinson travelled down there for the Grassroots Social Club's AGM, brought his old medical cannabis with him, and had no worries of being down here in the south anyway. He recognised the power of his prescription from above there in the north. Comes across that imaginary line, and he's still a patient, while the rest of us suffering with the same ailments are criminals. So yeah, there we go. Anything else for people to add out there? As mentioned by Gary Gannon at the end of that stream there, that the meeting will reconvene on the 27th of November. Keep an eye out there for the stream to go live. I'll be able to go live there again with that stream to stay next week at 12:30. We'll know more about what the meeting actually is going to be about once the information is up there. It's probably up there now, but I just don't have it at hand. Anybody else got anything to chime in on there while I quickly have a look at the Committee on Drug Uses? Yeah, they don't have anything up there about the next meeting that I can see. Alright, level 9 says, but then you would need a letter probably to cover your grand. Yeah, that's with the cannabis down in the south in the Republic. Anytime I looked for cannabis, led away, Doc said no. Bong rips, sure, why not? Why not, Bobby? It'd be a shame if I didn't, huh? Yeah, it wouldn't be the same to get a stream going without acknowledging the fact that there was a little bit of civil disobedience. Every stream is a protest. Alright, John, all the best, man. Hope you're good up there. Nice to see you there in Hotbox. Catch you later, Spliff. Finish off here with an old bong rip as requested. Bit of Exodus and Psychosis inside in that. Some incredible stream names. Yeah, Pakish. Pakish is joining us there on the civil disobedience as well. Everybody, it's been a blast. Until next time, keep it lit and stay blessed. Peace.